candidate. Couldn't seem to work it out, so instead of not having a forum, we're having just the one. So we're going to start off tonight. We don't have mics, so bear with us. Michael's not quiet and shy, so we should be able to hear him. And we're going to start off with 5 minutes of who, what, where, and why. Take it away.
Okay. So I'll make sure I talk loud so it gets on the audio. My name is Michael Gordon, and I'm running for State House District 49, which is parts of Roswell, Alpharetta, and Milton. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, living the American dream up in New England, and I was a student athlete, state champion wrestler, honor student, and I was inducted to the National Honor Society in high school as a senior. And then I went to the University of Rhode Island for college, got my Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Computer Science, and then I received a Master's in Mathematics as well. I raised 2 children, and when they grew up, they left the house, and right around 2020, things really started to fall apart, it seems, in our country. So I was never a political person by nature. I didn't grow up with that, just minding my own business. But with all the problems we started having, with the elections and the COVID and everything else, it just seemed to be. That's when I decided to get involved, and I started to, reach out and meet with other people, and one thing led to another. In my career as a software developer, it came in handy because when I started looking at legislation, we were looking at how we could maybe look at some legislation in Georgia, looking at other states, and I started looking at that. I said, well, I can do this. This is a requirements document, basically. That's what the bills are. You're changing the rules in order to accomplish a purpose. Well, I did that my whole career. So I worked on that, and I started working with legislators, and nothing was going, and they didn't want to do any of the things that I thought we needed done. So that's when a friend of mine, who had actually recently just been elected to office, suggested that I run for office, and I thought she was crazy, because I have, no name recognition, I'm not political at all. But then I thought about it, but a week later I decided to run. And here I am today running, and I'm very excited, and I really feel like there's a lot we can do, and I'm just excited to get started doing it. So that's my, and why am I running? I'm running because things are really not going the way that they should be going. Ronald Reagan said it best. He said, we're always one generation away from losing our freedoms. And I feel like that's never been more true than it is today. And so I feel like I don't want to be that generation. And so I'm going to do everything I can to serve my country and to serve my state to make sure that we don't lose freedom in this generation. Freedom requires vigilance. And I myself have been sleeping at the wheel for most of my life politically, and it's time to change that. So that's really why I'm running, is to save this country for future generations, because they really need our help. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, let's begin with the first question. You got 2 minutes in which to deal with this. If you want to sit down, you can. It's up to you.
Yeah, I like to be closer to the people.
And we'll hear you.
and you'll hear better. I want to make sure I yell. I'm not yelling at you guys. I'm yelling so that we get picked up on the audio.
The first question is, how can Georgia better uphold the Constitution, and how would you ensure that happens?
Well, that's a great question. Everyone who gets into office swears an oath to support the Constitution, both the U.S. and Georgia. So it's really not optional. It's not a partisan issue. It's not a left versus right. So it absolutely has to happen. And basically what that means is that government is supposed to be limited. The Constitution limits government to certain things. Okay? And so we're not obviously following that. We've got a lot of things that are going on that are beyond the legitimate scope of government. So we've got to rein in out of control government, both on the state and the federal level. And the way we rein it in on the federal level, because in Georgia, is by nullifying anything that they try to do that is beyond their legitimate authority, as per the Constitution and the Declaration. So we need to do that in every way that they're violating that. So I can give specifics throughout. I don't want to get bogged down with the details here, but the gist of it is we've got to get back to limited government and the proper role of government, which is protecting people
next question is, do you believe there should be strict enforcement of boys and girls bathrooms and locker rooms from a biological sex standpoint in all schools, public and private, in the state of Georgia?
Absolutely, yeah. As far as I know, boys are boys and girls are girls. Whether they think differently doesn't change that biological fact. And I think it's unfair to subject boys and girls to, being exposed to the opposite sex in various situations, whether it's competing in sports, whether it's in the privacy of a bathroom, or anything that's gender appropriate. We need to maintain that. It's just the right thing to do.
Okay. All right. The next question is, do you support the elimination of state income tax in Georgia?
That's a hot button right now, and absolutely, in theory, I do. But the way we need to do that, we need to be careful, because right now, Georgia is accepting billions of dollars every year in federal money that is not authorized by the Constitution. Getting back to your earlier question about how you can actually reestablish the Constitution. So before we start eliminating a legitimate, although not desirable, income tax, first we need to start following the Constitution and wean ourselves off of the federal money that we shouldn't be taking for things that they have no business giving us. So we've got to do that first. But then I think that if we restore government to its proper function of protecting our rights, there's a lot of programs. Up to 70 to 80% of the budget is programs that are not constitutional. They are not within the scope of government protecting people's rights. They're providing services for this or that. And we need those services. I'm not saying we don't need them, but it's just not government's role to provide them. I think that the free market can do a better job, will have higher quality and lower costs if we do it that way. So ultimately, yes, I would like to see that done, but we have to do it the right way.
Okay. The next question, the legislature passed some good bills in the last session. What more needs to be done?
Okay, well, that's kind of what are the good bills we're talking about here. So let me give an example of what somebody might think is a good bill that I don't actually think is. And I don't remember the numbers, so forgive me. There's a bill that they got rid of the QR codes for voting. So you have the QR code on the ballot, and the machines that read the ballots read this cryptic code that nobody figures out what it is. And everyone realizes that that's really going against the intent of the law, which is to have that voter be confident that their ballot is being counted correctly. So what they did is they said, well, we're going to have a new technology that reads the text. It's still a machine that's reading the text instead of reading this QR code. So in my view, it sounds good in theory, but you're not actually solving anything, because you still have a machine that's trying to figure out how you voted, and you have no idea to verify that the machine did it correctly. So we haven't really solved the problem. So the legislators, a lot of folks who are in office today will tell you, wow, that was a really big thing. That was great, but it wasn't. And there's lots of examples of that. So I think that question is hard to answer, because it really depends on what you mean by a good bill. So.
The next question, in the coming month, the world is debating and potentially passing a World Health Organization promoted pandemic treaty. What do you see as the implications for Georgians, and what is your position on this issue?
Another good question. It's a real concern. We've got a global agency that's trying to dictate healthcare standards across the world. Well, we are an independent country. In our declaration, we declared independence, and as far as I know, that hasn't been overridden. So until it has, then we do not answer to any global international body. Okay. Now, my opponent voted for a bill. The version of the bill, it was HB 1013 a couple of years ago, that included allowing the World Health Organization to define our healthcare standards. Okay. Now that bill got changed before it was passed, but he voted for the version which had that in it. So I am adamantly opposed to having any other entity other than Georgia themselves. It shouldn't even be the federal government dictating the policies in Georgia, because it's beyond the scope of their authority. So it should be the Georgians that decide our own healthcare policies, not the federal government or any other body in our country or throughout the world.
Okay. The next question is, what are are the things you think we need to be doing on the state level to address the immigration and border crisis?
Yes. Great questions. You guys are on top of things, obviously. There is no doubt we have a crisis at the border. And according to our Constitution, they are supposed to repel invasions, and they are failing miserably. So what can we do on the state level to address this, given the fact that the federal government is not doing its constitutional duty? Well, the first thing that we can do is point that out and have them make it sure that we know what they're doing and that we're not accepting that, we're not okay with that. But we can do more. We're not a border state, but we are impacted by that. So I would say the first thing that we should do is we should start investigating to identify the scope of the problem in Georgia and say, we should start tracking, okay, who's here? Like, do we have a lot of immigrants that are illegal? Where are they, and how are they impacting our systems and so on? So the first thing is to do the research and the investigation to gather the information on the extent of the problem in Georgia. And then based on that, we should look at, okay, well, how do we resolve this? I mean, in principle, I'm all for immigration as long as it's done legally through a process where we can manage it in an orderly way that is good for both the immigrants and for the people who lived here before. So we need to make sure that whatever policies we come up with regarding that we protect the rights of the citizens who are here and not impose undue burdens on them, and that we have legal immigration. Illegal immigration needs to be, the laws need to be enforced. It's just that simple, and we're not. So we need to change that.
Okay. The next question is, what's your position on getting rid of these electronic disasters and election integrity for Georgia?
I am all for election integrity. A lot of folks in office, including my opponent, will tell you we have the best election system in the world. According to Biden, we have the best election fraud system in the world. I think he was onto something there. We do not have election integrity today. Our voter rolls are still highly inaccurate, and we have more people on the rolls than we have registered voters. There are people with invalid addresses. There's all kinds of issues with that. We have people who are voting who have no business voting. We don't validate that they're actually citizens. It's just too chaotic the way we do that. And with the machines, look at what happened with Michelle Spears in DeKalb County. In an actual live primary election, they got the results completely turned around. And it was so bad, it wasn't simply a matter of over 3,000 of Michelle's ballots weren't counted. Well, the guy who won, according to the machines, and when they did the hand recount, came in third when Michelle won. Well, he got more votes by the machines than he actually had. So just imagine you have your paper ballots going through the machine. How does the machine add more votes to a guy than there are ballots to justify that? It makes no sense. So there's some serious problems, and that's just one example. We got lucky in that case that one was exposed. So it's unaccountable. We can't verify the results. We need to go back to hand-counted, hand-marked paper ballots in the precinct on election day with making the ballot records public so that people can verify the results themselves. We need ballot IDs so that we can prevent ballot box stuffing, and we need to have address validation and things like that so we can clean up the voter rolls. We just got to do it. We're not there, and I'm very disappointed with the past couple of sessions with our legislator, in particular my opponent, who has done nothing to solve these problems.
Okay. The next question is, voting on accepting federal money isn't smart for any state. It adds to debt and puts a vice on the state obligations to the feds. What will you do to limit and reduce debt?
Well, when I get elected, I will be swearing an oath to follow the Constitution. And what that means is I, by duty, am not allowed, in conscious and in legal obligation, to accept any federal money that is not authorized by the Constitution, which basically means for defense, Georgia, the military defense, that protect our state from invasion, that sort of thing. But education, health care, all these programs that we're getting, all this federal money with strings attached, we need to stop taking their money. You know, we need to understand the scope of the problem. It's in the multi-billions every year. And with that, like I said, before we start looking at getting rid of these other taxes, like income tax and property tax, and maybe reducing them once we get our government within the scope of its proper function. Before we do that, we need to wean ourselves off the federal money. So I will work very vigorously. I will never vote for a budget that includes accepting that money. And there will be, no matter what the pressure is, I'm not going to do it as a statement until we can discipline the legislature to stop doing that and to be responsible and not take money that we shouldn't be taking. Because that adds to inflation, because the feds create that money, and if we take it, we're enabling inflation. And that's exactly, my opponent has voted for 97% of all the measures that have been introduced for the last 3 years. 97%, that's basically everything, okay? And he always votes for the budget. So he's not following the Constitution. That's got to stop, and I will definitely make that a top priority.
Okay. The next question is, what can you do to stop illegal immigrants from voting in the next election cycle?
Well, like this election cycle? Because
I'm
I
reading the
can't
question,
do anything,
I'm not
I'm
sure.
not in office yet.
Yeah, so it's got to be the next.
Yeah. So once I'm into office, what we'll do is we need to go through and have all of the processes associated with elections thoroughly vetted and make sure that they are secure. And that will include making sure that only eligible voters, that means people who are citizens, who are 18 years or older, who are non-felons, who have meet the residential requirements, that they can vote. So that would mean that any illegal doesn't qualify. So we need to find ways to make sure that we can make sure that that happens. And we do it in such a way that everyone has confidence that it's being done and it's not just talk. So.
Okay. Next question. It seems that the federal dollars that we get don't cost us anything. Is that true?
No. It's the most insidious tax there is. It's called inflation. When you have a certain amount of money, and if the government prints more money, however they spend it, okay, the purchasing power of your money goes down. That's no different if they just took your money, which is what the government does. We call that taxes. So this is a tax, and it's a tax which most people don't realize, and so that's why I call it the most insidious tax. And my opponent has been voting for this tax. He claims to be all fighting for lowering taxes, while he is actually raising taxes in this way, not only through inflation, but through adding to the debt, which we have to pay interest on. And where's that money going to come from? More taxes. So you can't keep spending, and lower taxes. It doesn't work. So he spends, he taxes, and he tries to hide these taxes. That's got to stop. We need to be honest. We need to put it out there, and we need to stop inflating our money supply and calling it no big deal, because it is a big deal. Obviously, most of you folks feel it when you go to the grocery stores, when you go to the clothing stores, things are 50% more, and you notice the quantities are smaller too. Prices are high. It's crazy. Inflation is rampant, and this is why. So we got to stop enabling inflation.
The next question is, where do you think you could add value to the legislative process so Georgians are better served?
That's a great question. You guys are loaded with good questions tonight, so thank you. There's a lot of ways I can add value. First of all, I'm going to stay in bounds with the Constitution. I teach a Constitution class, so I know what the Constitution allows and doesn't allow. It's a great class. There's another class coming up in May. If people who haven't signed, please reach out to me. We'll get you signed up. We need to follow the Constitution. And so, what was the question again?
Sure.
I got
Bear with me a second. I moved away from it. Where do you think you could add value?
Okay.
To
So
the
not
legislature.
only can I introduce legislation as a legislator that I can't do as a citizen to deal with these issues, and that will raise awareness. But I can also start educating other legislators on the Constitution, because they don't seem to have forgotten it. And whenever they try to do something, I say, well, show me in the Constitution where that's out there. So I will be teaching and building relationships with folks, trying to move all the legislators to get onto following the Constitution, which they are by oath required to do. It's actually a felony to willfully not follow the Constitution in Georgia. So I will work with other legislators to educate them, get them to start doing the right thing. introduce and support whatever legislation will get us back, rein in the out-of-control government, both in terms of the scope and spending. And then, of course, I'll be able to introduce things, and I'll be able to give you guys information about what's going on, about, that an honest view of what's really happening, things that matter to us, relating to the future of our country that you may not be getting right now from certain folks. So.
Okay. The next question is, there has been significant talk on Georgia joining the ranks of states that abolished the state income tax. Okay, that's a repeat. Hang on. Okay, sorry. We're going to run into that on occasion.
Yep.
The state of Georgia is currently running huge surpluses, and the state budget is as big as ever. There has been a small reduction in state taxes as a result. What's your position on the best uses of this surplus?
Again, the surplus is a momentary situation, and I don't want to base policies based on one situation. Granted, if you have a surplus, I don't want to spend it on more stuff that we shouldn't be spending on anyway. So that's the first. But the larger question is, how do we rein in government, both on the federal level and the state level, to get them to do only the things that they are authorized to do? If they do that, then that's going to reduce the scope of budget, the scope of government, and they won't cost them as much. So once we do that, then we can permanently reduce tax rates, with the ideal being getting it to the point where we eliminate the income tax completely. Because I believe, in theory, in principle, the income tax is basically a tax on your property. Your money is your property. And if you're taxed on your property, then your property is being taken. Like, that's, to me, that's just not right. So I'm opposed to income tax on any level. And I also would like to see property taxes, your home property taxes. But again, we have to rein in government first so that we can then, get rid of these taxes without incurring debt. So the first is to get the government to its proper size. Then all these taxes and all the surpluses are just indications that we're taxing too much. And that's a good thing that we realize that, and we're bringing government back into its proper scope. And then hopefully we can eliminate these taxes permanently and get government to be functioning, just doing the things they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be the referee, not a player in the game. Imagine if the referee started picking winners and losers. Like, we need to get out of that business. It's very expensive, and we can find better things to do with our money. So I'd like to see us to be in a situation where they don't have to even give us our money back because they never took it in the first place. So, yeah.
Okay. This has a preamble, and then I'll ask a question.
Okay.
It is a known fact at this point that the COVID-19 shots do not prevent the spread of COVID, nor protect one from getting COVID. And data shows that there has been millions of adverse reactions to this experimental treatment. Here's a question. Then why is it that any kid going off to college still has to receive the shot? And then the other, it's kind of like a three-part piece.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm fine.
All right. What are your thoughts on this subject? Can you stop colleges and universities and K through 12 schools from mandating all these shots as a requirement to get in school? And then, is there something you can address and change?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in medical freedom. I think, my body, my choice. That doesn't mean I'm for abortions. It just means that when it has to do with you, it should be your decision, because you have the most interest in your body than anybody else. So there's no reason. We don't need government to tell us how to govern our own bodies. Government's job is to protect us from other people who might violate our rights, not from ourselves. It's gone way out of hand. And so with the whole vaccine situation, it's a very sensitive area. I know a lot of folks have been vaccinated. It is an experimental thing. We know now that it does not prevent you from getting the virus, and it does not prevent you from spreading the virus. So I still believe it should be personal choice whether you get vaccinated or any other medical procedure or device or whatever. It should be personal choice. So with regard to the question about what can we do with schools, well, schools are, if So anything that receives government money, we can influence them if we want to, as far as putting requirements on getting that money. That's one of the reasons why we do that, because we give them the money, they need to meet our requirements. And because of there's been a lot of adverse reactions that have been recorded about this, and it's a risk. So how can we expect individuals to take that risk? Are we going to bear the brunt of the implications of that? No. So it needs to be the individual choice, and kids shouldn't be forced to do that when they go to school. So we can make any school that receives state funding, in order to do that, they need to not force people to go against their own conscience when it comes to their own medical health care. So that would be the main thing to do that. And the same with businesses, but I don't believe the government should tell them what to do. But I think that if we hold people liable for the harm that they cause, that's the right way to put an end to this abusive behavior within our schools and our businesses.
Okay. The next question is, if you could change one thing that happens under the Gold Dome, what would it be?
I would have my opponent not work there anymore.
That was quick.
And me working there.
Okay. And the next question is, what can an elected representative do to reduce crime and protect and support law enforcement?
Great question. I'm a big believer in law enforcement. I don't believe we should ever defund our law enforcement and police departments, but there is something that a lot of folks may not be aware of. We also need to demilitarize our police and denationalize our police, because there's a lot of stuff going on where they're taking federal money, which they shouldn't be doing that. They should be funded locally and controlled locally through the local officials who are most accountable to we the people. And that's the best way to handle local law enforcement. We need to make sure that we do that and fully fund them, and these people need to be paid well. What they do is amazing. It's an important job. But we've got to get the federal government out of it, and any private entities that are trying to take our local law enforcement and turn it into something else and make it answerable to a higher authority. That we don't need that. And so it's very important that we stop that and that we support our local police locally and that we fully fund them. Absolutely. So I will, as a legislator, I can introduce whatever legislation we need to that's missing, and I can oppose any legislation that would threaten what we just talked about. So that's what I would do.
Okay. The next question is, how do we curtail the influence of special interest groups in creating over legislation? I think that's what it's saying.
Okay, so I'll interpret that to mean, how do we stop special interest groups from influencing legislation in a way that's against the interest of the people in general, like just for their own benefits? Crony capitalism, if you will. It's an ongoing thing. It's an age-old problem. The best way we can do it is to have real transparency, and to also, I would make it if it's not already, I'm not familiar with every single law that's on the books, I would make it that any legislator that has a conflict of interest in anything that they're legislating on should recuse himself from voting on that measure and should disclose that fact. And if they don't, there should be consequences, because it's just got to stop. And that was one thing I would do. Another thing that I would do is try to have more ways to reduce the cost of running for office, not to take away everyone's freedom, but so that it doesn't be so dependent upon money that people are willing to do things they wouldn't like to do in order to get that money. And then they'll justify it by saying, well, I need to do that to get an office to be able to serve the people. And it's just, once you start down that path, So we got to look at all the different ways that we can reduce the influence of money in our elections, in our legislating, as well as our elections, and the influence in the process of legislating and making it more transparent so that people so that they can't do that with a conflict of interest. So we need to address that. It's an ongoing issue.
Okay.